Hey everyone, today we're reviewing Babel by R.F. Kuang. I don't actually think this is going to be part of a series, so it's a standalone. I did not particularly like this book, just being forthright with you. But instead of being like a Debbie Downer, I'm going to describe what I like about this book as well as other books similar to it to hopefully encourage you to read more. If I was to describe my relationship with Kuang's work, I would say that she's one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author, for her conceptual work. I write really extensive book reviews on my blog, and with her books, I'm actually able to go really far in depth about a lot of different historical details and analyzing them on different levels, which is not something I can do with pretty much any other working author, simply because of how she writes her books. And I really value that, and I hope more authors are so daring in the future. This is a serious work of art and it deserves to be taken seriously. I think if my biggest complaint will be that this book feels like it needed another year or two in the oven. It felt like if the author pushed it a little further, shaved it down, made it a little bit shorter, did a little bit more research, pushed it a little harder, fixed up the prose, fixed the characterization, I felt that this would have been a better book. In my preparation for this, I listened to two different lecture series, which are both 30 hours long, as well as read a couple nonfiction books about the history of China and the British Empire at the time. Okay, what's the target audience? What genres? What are this book's major tropes? It's for a 16 plus year old audience. It definitely has gore, somewhat. It's a very dark book. It's decolonialist fiction. It's by a BIPOC, both author and subject matter, meaning it is Black, Indigenous, person of color. Interrogates the guilt within the Western education system and how universities can be used as tools of oppression by a governing body. The British Empire of the 1830s through 1840s and the Chinese Poppy Wars of the British Empire. Whenever a white person reviews something quite so racially loaded by a non-white author, there comes an element of risk. I just want to say, going into this book is a valid work of art. I appreciate what the author is trying to say. Okay, let's get this going. This book's concept was as the life story of a young man who's caught between two worlds. Born in China in poverty, but he travels to Britain where he gains wealth and status as a translator at a school of translation. This is a really fascinating concept. It explores the innate tension in what it means to be a biracial person, not something I've personally experienced, but I thought it was a really interesting topic and I was glad to see the author tackle it. I thought this was a really good concept about showing how China on one hand and Britain on the other hand lead to divided loyalties within someone on an even ethnic level. That was a very cool idea. I did not enjoy this book's execution of this concept. It felt like on the ethnic level, okay, this book has a lot of racist white characters. On an ethnic level, it was obvious from the beginning that the protagonist was going to side with China over Britain because all the British people were racist. This felt to me like it was a disappointment of what the book's fundamental concept was. I wanted tension for the biracial person between the British and the Chinese. There was no tension because it was obvious from the start he was going to side with the Chinese. Let's talk about characters for a minute, and in particular the character of Letty. She is the twist antagonist. However, if you could read even a little bit of the subtext, you knew that she was going to be the main antagonist from the very beginning of the book, just because of how passive-aggressive and what a Karen she was. But I liked this, actually. Paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King, the enemy of reform is not the unapologetic racist, it's the squishy moderate who likes things as things are right now and doesn't particularly want to change them. Letty was meant to be the manifestation of that social force. Letty was at best a performative ally. She believes that she's empathetic with the main characters for going through tough times at school. However, in the end, she would side with her own people and wealth instead of making sacrifices for the sake of the greater good. That was a neat idea. I think the author did a very admirable job including that in her book. Now, there were problems. I did not like the twist at the end that, oh, she betrayed us because Rami dumped her. And she's just a wild and crazy, love drives you insane. I was like, oh, you had something good going on here. Why did you have to do that? That was really undermined the story you were telling. That was a problem for me. It's okay. It felt like the author was trying to really hold the hand of the reader through this. It was this was going to be a very nuanced story, and then it just became so obvious and blunt. And I was like, no, you had something beautiful here. Why is this so obvious? Letty isn't the only villainous white person in this book. Now, I'll just be blunt. All of the English people in this book basically sniff their own farts and are self-righteous. That's a choice. It's a valid choice. I've read a lot of books that basically had the same idea. I didn't really like it here because it didn't feel earned. This book is specifically historical context. If you want to talk about the British Empire in this era in any detail, which this book obviously did, you should talk about the abolitionist movement that was going on in the background. You should talk about the workers' rights movements, the communism, the socialism that's going on in the background. You should talk about the hardcore Christians who work to free people and that sort of thing. This doesn't. This makes the British appear like nefarious evil people without going into the detail of what is actually going on in the underclass and all the countercultural movements going on. I'm like, why? There could be so much more from this. This book was very well researched, and it wasn't well researched enough. I really liked the setting and world building. The magic was very unique. I kind of wish the author went into it a little more. This book didn't work for me overall. The bad guys were just too obviously... It felt like the author was holding our hands, trying to make us realize, oh, racism is bad. This is without nuance. Okay. I felt like this could have been a little bit better. And for example, I'll show you Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. Okay. In Ring Shout, it has a very associated idea. Ring Shout is about, in the American South, particularly the spread of the Ku Klux Klan in the post-Nazi era. In particular, the spread of the Ku Klux Klan's racism is portrayed to be an eldritch abomination, Cthulhu-like, Lovecraftian horror-like. I liked this conceit. All the bad guys were evil, and it was portrayed by using the medium of eldritch horror. We realize that racism is alien to human nature. It shouldn't be there. I felt that Ring Shout handled the concept of racism in a more interesting way than Babel. And now for another one. Let's introduce you to The Glamorous Histories by Mary Robinette Kowal, particularly Without a Summer, book 3 in the series. The Glamorous Histories is about this same era in England. In particular, it discusses basically racism, colonialism, that sort of thing. In book 3 in particular, it explores the Irish. At the time, Ireland was a British colony. Before I read this book, I didn't really realize that, internalize it, that Ireland's really mistreated at the time. Slightly later than Babel or this book, the Irish potato famine would happen and millions of people would die because of Britain. I would have liked if Babel did something similar, maybe going in more depth about the Irish people. I've read many reviews for Babel, and a lot of the white reviewers say I can't connect to this book. I think if you included Ireland as an example of British racism, they might get it. Now, a person of color author doesn't have to change their art to cater to the whims of the masses, the white masses. I'll just leave it there. In writing, there's something called show don't tell. This is a general rule that if you have a choice between providing narration about a topic or showing the topic, you should pick the show. For example, if you have a character who's an alcoholic, you could say, this character is an alcoholic, or you could show them compulsively drinking alcohol. As a general rule, you want to do the show them drinking alcohol instead of saying this character is an alcoholic. For Babel, in particular about the topic of colonialism and how bad it was, the characters were in Oxford the entire time. A lot of the colonialism that they were talking about was on the other side of the planet. If you're trying to show and not tell, go to the other side of the planet. I felt like this book should have been looking abroad, focusing on the wounds and injuries that colonialism causes elsewhere. By making the focus of the book on Oxford, you're taking the lens of the story off of suffering and put it on, well, Oxford. I did not understand why the author made this choice. Halfway through the book, the characters did go to China, so it feels like the author did realize she needed to leave Oxford to make the actual story work. But it should have been more of a focus of the story. Feel like they should have spent half the story in a lot of different places exploring different aspects of the British colonial project. I'll leave it there. One book I felt did this particularly well was Everfair by Nisi Shaw. Nisi Shaw did this a little better. Everfair is about, I believe, the Belgian rubber farms in Africa. I really love the book. I read it 8 years ago. It really stuck with me. I bring it up because the book really shows what made the Belgians in Africa so heinous, specifically on their rubber farms. With slaves, they would cut off the hands of the slaves. Going off back to the photo, turning off the light again, you'll see the character has one normal hand and one robot hand. So this is a person with a prosthetic. They had their hand cut off by the white oppressors and replaced. This book did a good job of providing a focus on the characters who were injured by colonialism, going on site to where it's happening and making the story happen there. That's just one way of writing a book. I particularly enjoyed it. I have a lot of other thoughts, but this is getting long. See you around.